Scotland is home to plenty of ancient distilleries scattered across its landscape. Over hundreds of years, these sites and the communities around them are no stranger to death and tragedy. Over time, spirits come and go from these weathered buildings just as frequently as the stills change. So here's a rundown of Scotland's most haunted distilleries and their terrifying tales. Our first story takes us to the island of Jura, where it's said the distillery has been haunted by not one but two unsettled spirits. The first paranormal encounter dates back over 200 years and it's said to have played a role in the founding of the island distillery that we know today. So here's how it goes. Back in 1781, distilling was banned on the island by Laird Archibald Campbell, which closed the island's only distillery. Campbell carried on with his life for 29 years without rethinking his decision. That was until he was fearfully woken one night by a ghostly old woman hovering over his bed, furious with the lack of whisky on the island. She gave him such a fierce talking to that Campbell had a change of heart, leading to the original Jura Distillery being founded in 1810. And to make sure she never returned to harass anyone else on the island, a bottle of 16-year-old whisky was buried in a secret cave in an attempt to keep her happy. Jumping forward a little to 2010, the distillery experienced a slightly friendlier ghost, Elizabeth Quinn, who was reached by psychic Joan Charles. It was actually the distillery's cat, known as Elvis, who managed to capture footage of the kind but authoritative spirit after two journalists rigged him with a camera when they were on the hunt for paranormal activity. The former distillery manager, Willie Cochrane, later confirmed that there was a teacher called Elizabeth many years ago who thankfully was a kind-hearted woman and cared for the children. Across the water from Jura, we're headed on to the island of Islay. Of course, it's known by whisky lovers all over the world for its fantastic distilleries, but far less may be familiar with the story of the island's headless horseman. One dark and stormy night, Crofter Lachlan Ban was battling his way home when he was met with a harrowing sight. Galloping away from his house was a headless ghost disappearing into the darkness. Arriving at his house, Lachlan was terrified to find the ghoul had opened a bottle of Bowmore. He'd had a dram and blown the fire out. After this eerie encounter, the islanders swore never to offer an opened bottle of whisky to visitors in an attempt to prevent the figure from returning. There is, however, a slightly more reasonable story behind Lachlan's encounter. His brother later revealed he had tried to visit Lachlan that night, saying, "The wind had thrown open your door and blown out the fire. I brought a bottle of Bowmore to share with you, but couldn't wait long, so I took a quick swig and rode home with my coat pulled over my head to keep out the rain." Though for some reason or another, this version of events never became widely known, and that's why even now the islanders will often open a fresh bottle for visitors. We're also getting into the spirit of things at the Scotch Malt Whisky Society this Halloween with a special bottling coming out. It's called Supernaturally Sweet Smoke, 12-year-old Islay whisky. It's part of our winter series and it's going to make a beautiful set of whiskies. There are 4 bottles in this series with a really nice set of labels between them, and each one will take you to a story, a poem or a song by our very own whisky bard, Robin Lang. There's a QR code on the back that will take you there. Well worth checking out for the whisky and the stories. At Glenrothes Distillery in Speyside, it's customary to start every tour with a toast to the ghost. But how was it that this tradition came to be? Well, this is the fascinating but eerie story of Byway the Ghost. To give you the full picture, we need to travel back to 1898 and introduce you to Major James Grant, who was the owner of Glen Grant Distillery at the time. The charismatic Major was known to be quite an adventurer, and during a hunting trip to Rhodesia, now known as Zimbabwe of course, he came across an impoverished orphan named Byway. The Major was taken aback by the starving boy and worried for his health, so he talked to the local tribe to offer his help. Agreeing that Byway didn't have much time left, the tribe conceded his best chance for survival would be to return with the Major to the north of Scotland, where he would become his page boy. Byway effortlessly settled into his new life in Scotland, and it wasn't long before he was a well-loved member of the community, picking up the local accent and even serving for the British Army with distinction in World War I. Byway lived a quiet life after the war, became a die-hard supporter and player for the local football team, and lived there until his death in 1972. He was put to rest in the cemetery overlooking Glenrothes Distillery, and just a few years later people began reporting sightings of an old man with dark skin and a scratchy beard appearing during the night shifts. Byway's sightings in the distillery continued, and it was even reported that for some strange reason the number 3 still wasn't working properly. It wasn't until Cedric Wilson, a pharmacology professor and amateur paranormal researcher, came to the distillery to examine the supernatural ongoings that they found some form of explanation to Byway's unrest. Wilson believed that when the new still house was built in 1980, it disturbed a ley line running through the cemetery and unsettling Byway's grave. Thankfully, a remedy was offered and iron rods were installed into the ley line, redirecting the energy flow to its original route. Byway now rests in peace, but his spirit lives on in the distillery to this day with the tradition of the toast to the ghost. Plagued by a tale of death and deceit, Campbelltown is also home to another haunted distillery, Glen Scotia. On the night before Christmas Eve, back in 1930, distillery owner Duncan McCallum drowned himself in the distillery's water source, Crosshill Loch. He'd recently been left bankrupt by a shady business deal, and although it's not clear if there was any foul play in his untimely death, current distillery manager Ian McAllister admits there were mysterious circumstances. It's said that McCallum still haunts the distillery to this day, with many employees on the site refusing to work in certain areas after dark. His disturbed poltergeist pays close attention to any contractors visiting the distillery, with many feeling like they're being watched. Until next time, cheers.